Each and every year, I speak about the significance of one film I've seen. I select one film which contains a relevant message for the Jewish world, or some kind of theme that relates to Yiddishkeit. This year, it's a TV series and a film. I'm referring to Downton Abbey. For those of you who haven't seen this TV series and now film, it's a narrative about British nobility who live in a country manor and enjoy all of the extravagancies of their time, while below the staff of the estate live and work to take care of every aspect of life. So there's drama above and there's drama below. And here's where the connection to Yiddishkeit presents itself. You see, our Torah presents such an idea. It's described in the first chapter, the first column of the Torah. On the first day of creation, God creates light. And then on the second day of creation, Vayomer Elohim yehi rakia betoch hamayim vayehiv mavdil bein mayim lemayim. And God said, let there be a rakia, a firmament, a divider in the water, and let it divide water from water. And God made a rakia, and God divided the waters under the rakia from the waters above the rakia. And some Torah commentators understand the firmament to be the sky or the clouds. On the website thetorah.com, which is an incredible website, I highly recommend, author Dr. Oren Fass, in his article, My Encounter with the Firmament, explains that his Orthodox yeshiva upbringing never explained the firmament, or rather the lack of an actual scientific firmament, in the world to his satisfaction. And while I empathize with his education, I think he misses the point. The Torah never purports itself to be a book of science, or even a book of history for that matter. And I know that dividers have been built into the world. We all know it. We sense it on a daily basis. They even exist throughout our Jewish tradition. We know about the separation between milk and meat, the separation between the holiness of Shabbat and the mundane nature of the work week. We know the separation that Kohanim and Leviim receive honors before all of us lowly Israelites, even this morning at the Torah. The Torah itself is an epic written around a small group of characters from Exodus through the end of Deuteronomy. The narrative revolves around Moses and his inner circle, and there is a divide between Moses and Aaron and Miriam in the inner circle and the rest of the Jewish people. In the Talmud, the sages are up here and they refer to everybody else as Amcha, or regular folk, not up here. This is the motif of our Machzor prayer book. In these high holidays, we live below in the world, and God sits above on a throne of judgment. Unatana Tokev asks, who will live and who will die? And only the true judge above knows. And yet today, on Yom Kippur, we try to erase the dividers in the world. We erase the divisions in our community, and we erase the partitions in our soul. And how do we prepare for the special event of erasing the divide and welcoming God into our lives? Exactly as the servants do in Downton Abbey. They put on white gloves, we wear white robes. They wind the clock anew before a party, we begin the calendar anew before the high holidays. They prepare for interesting dinner conversation, we prepare a book to help us in a day of prayer. Today we recite Yizkor in an effort to connect with loved ones who have crossed over that great divide. We stand together, not as individuals in deep reflection, but as a people appreciative of our Jewish tradition, of our tradition of forgiveness, of our culture of family and extended family, while other faith traditions admit guilt alone in secrecy. We stand united together. And for most of society, it is impossible to remain like this, without divisions. For most of the time, we rely on categorization to recognize appropriate interaction. But in this community, we strive to remain like this as much as possible. In this community, we strive to treat each member with the same level of kavod. We intend to interact and educate each child according to his or her own level of gifts. We expect our members to share their talents, their contacts, their resources. And I've seen it. It's not intended for public knowledge, but I've seen it. I've sat with families who support our religious school without acknowledgement. I've spoken with families who need medical attention, and I've recommended other members of this community to call for guidance. I've watched as children and adults, longtime members and newcomers, all sit and converse and laugh together during our Shabbat Kiddush. When I was a child in Chicago, my father used to take my siblings and I on the Sunday before Passover and deliver ma'od chitim, food for the poor. And we'd carry boxes of Passover food into Jewish apartments. And my father would speak Yiddish with most of the recipients of those boxes of food. These strangers would feel so grateful that they'd take my head in their hands, just like my own grandparents, and they'd give me a kiss. And as much as these people were strangers, oftentimes I never knew their name. Instinctively, by the way they took my head and kissed my forehead, I knew that they were family. And that idea of our Jewish people as our family must become our rallying call for the future, beginning right here in our community. Most of us in this synagogue today more closely resemble the noble Crowley family that lives upstairs in Downton Abbey. And yet when we think of our position as Jews in the world, we speak as though we're the servants below. We're the most privileged generation of Jews to ever walk the face of the earth, and we're living in the most privileged country in the history of the world. So what does that mean for the rest of our Jewish family? It means that if there is one hungry person living in Israel, it is in fact our responsibility to feed them. Whether that person is Ethiopian, living in South Tel Aviv, or living in Jerusalem for 1,000 generations, that person is our brother and our sister, and we're going to take this responsibility seriously. As I mentioned on Rosh Hashanah, our partnership with Leket to help feed our brothers and sisters in Israel will become a cause near and dear to all of our hearts. The Torah commands us to give bikurim, first fruits, during the harvest holidays of Sukkot and Shavuot. We're commanded to give matanot le'evyonim, gifts to the poor, on Purim. And we're commanded to give ma'od chitim on Pesach. For us, each of those commandments is an opportunity for us to give as a community to Leket, to feed a Jewish child at risk, or a purveyor of the Shoah in Israel, or an African refugee in Israel, or to help finance one of the vans needed for the delivery of the food. We will create a dedicated fund here at the synagogue so that in each of those holidays, each of us can give to a Adat Shalom directed toward Leket. And we will make a single contribution to Leket on behalf of our entire community. And it's a value we're going to take more seriously here at home as well. We'll begin with greater intentionality, building a relationship with Sova on Pico and the West Side Food Bank and like-minded organizations. We've already begun transforming the plenty that's left over at our community Friday night dinners into a greater mitzvah to help feed the hungry. And we will celebrate more often with fruit displays that will go to feed the hungry, just as we did on Rosh Hashanah. The world today feels very cynical. People look at everything skeptically. Politics are nasty. Civil discourse has deteriorated to new lows. The media echoes it into our living rooms for 24 hours each day. So it's no surprise that we grab onto a British film that portrays a more proper time, filled with etiquette and the core value of family. It's no surprise that the film opened at #1 in the box office just weeks ago. In the series and the film, at every turn, every plot twist, every time that one of the children might do something to embarrass the family honor and divide the family, in the end, the family stands by one another, because family is what the Abbey represents. The value of family is core to who we are as Jews. On Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, family flies across the world to be together. Family attends different synagogues to sit together. Family remembers loved ones who are no longer physically here to be together. Family bites their tongues and smiles at inappropriate jokes and compliments food that's not necessarily worthy. Because once the partition comes down, once the rakia fades away, we acknowledge that no matter the differences, our loved ones are simply everything. Whether it's biological or chosen, family is our best example of love without divisions. When I was sick in the hospital weeks ago, I was being comforted on heavy, heavy medication before surgery, and I fell into a deep sleep. Only hours before surgery, I dreamt a dream in which I was sitting at my grandparents' kitchen table in Fort Lauderdale, eating pancakes across the table from my grandfather Ba. I don't know if I was an adult or if I was a child, but my grandfather Ba, whose name was Simon Lebovitz, he smiled at me while we were eating a giant pile of pancakes with syrup. And my grandmother Gammy, Marie Lebovitz, she was, of course, cooking more pancakes right next to us. And it smelled, and it looked, and it tasted real. And then I found myself walking up to my grandma Faye Zellman as she was sitting in my parents' house, davening early in the morning before we'd all go to shul and daven all day for the high holidays. And she looked up, and she was so happy to see me. And then I saw my parents, and then Blair and the kids, and scenes of playing and dancing and laughing. I was standing by the window of a hotel in Tiberias one night when Blair and I first went to Israel together. And I turned back and looked at Blair lying there illuminated in the moonlight and thought about how lucky I was. And then I woke up at Cedar Sinai. And I'm telling you that the dream felt more real than the stark, white reality of the operating room that I entered only moments later. The operating room felt cold and sterile and foreign, and my mind took me to family that felt warm and familiar and comfortable. And I believe that we can all feel it. We all have the ability to relax the divides in our lives, in our souls. We just have to let go of the cynicism, and we have to embrace the romance that our tradition provides. The white, the melodies, the fasting, very soon the lulav, the etrog, the sukkah, and then the singing and the dancing with the Torah. And each time we chant Kol Nidre, or hear the shofar blast, or dance with the Torah, We're chanting the words of our ancestors. We're hearing the blast with our grandparents. We're dancing with the first Torah our ancestors received at Sinai. We're broadening our family to include Jews we already love, Jews who live far away, Jews who no longer live. Because at the zenith of our tradition, we're able to transition forward and backward across time and space. We can hear King David sing in Jerusalem in 1000 BCE by reciting the Psalms. We can walk along the Galilee with Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in the 2nd century by chanting the Zohar. And we can sit with Rav Ashi and Ravina in the 5th century in the study halls of Babylonia by studying the Talmud. I am able to hear the cries of my grandparents' grandparents as they endure pain in Eastern Europe. And I'm able to hear the laughter and song of my children's children, God willing, as they light the Hanukkah candles. And yet for too many Jewish families, the struggles of today ruin the beauty of our timelessness. Tablet magazine published an article by Adam Garfunkel on April 11, 2019, titled "The Collapse: Is This the End of American Jewry's Golden Age?" In it, Garfunkel writes that we're faced with, and I quote, "a perfect storm of mazel, one might say American Enlightenment universalism and Jewish particularism," end of quote. And while Garfunkel focuses on the social, cultural, political, and religious challenges for Jewish continuity in America, I would challenge all of it by saying the Jewish family is supposed to be able to endure all of it. We cannot divide today over issues of the moment. Our sense of family has pulled us through far more daunting challenges than the ones that we face right now. In December of 1991, my family traveled to Israel for the first time with our synagogue before my bar mitzvah. And while we were in Tel Aviv, we met my mother's side of the family in Israel one night, and then my father's side the next night. And each night, we would sit in the hotel lobby, separated on 2 couches facing one another. My immediate family all seated on a couch, one side of a long line of coffee tables, and then on another side, our new Israeli cousins that I'd never met sat across that great divide. It seemed like a summit between 2 delegations. The first night, we met my mom's family. The second night, we met my dad's family. My dad's side in Israel is ultra-Orthodox. And while my dad knew his cousin from childhood, nobody else had ever met. And our religious family there speaks little English, if at all. So I sat there as a 12-year-old studying this large man in a black suit and a black hat, chain-smoking cigarettes, cigarette after cigarette after cigarette. Smoke hovered over our entire interaction that evening. And finally, his daughter, my cousin, leaned into her father and suggested in Hebrew, "Dad, maybe you shouldn't smoke so much. They're our family." And he looked at her quizzically and responded, "Why would I stop smoking? They're our family." Now, I want to be perfectly clear for children in the room, I am not advocating smoking. But that story made such an impression on me that I've remembered it all these years. Family has to try to endure even the ugly, smelly, obnoxious moments. Our sense of family has to be stronger than that. Divisions exist only because we allow them to exist. Every day could be as powerful and as uniting as Yom Kippur if we try. So here's my suggestion. Let's try. We could explain to our loved ones that Yom Kippur is not the reason why we're sitting together today. The reason is that we love each other. And that love, that sense of family and togetherness, that's the reason why Yom Kippur has survived for thousands of years. Let's try appreciating those who are most familiar to us. Let's try appreciating the romance of our familiar tradition. Let's begin tomorrow. Second day of Yom Kippur. All the romance, all the family, the connections, the togetherness, but tomorrow I can have a latte. And at the end of Downton Abbey, the butler Carson speaks the last words of the film. He says 100 years from now, Downton will be standing, and the Crawleys will still be here. That's a promise. Many pundits wonder what the Jewish tradition will look like in 100 years. And I think the question for each of us is whether our family will still be sitting together in 100 years. For if the answer is yes, and our sense of family endures, then our tradition will stand. That's a promise. May we all be sealed for goodness, for togetherness. Gemar Chatima Tova.